All right, members, if you could take a seat. What's going on, buddy? We can begin. Staff can call roll.
Representative Henry.
Here.
Here. Representative Abraham. Representative Morris for Representative Abramson. Here. Representative Amade. Here. Representative Arms. Here. Representative Bacala. Here. Representative Bagley. Here. Speaker Barra. Representative Berthelot. Here. Representative Billiot. Here. Representative Carter. Here. Representative Cheney. Here. Representative Edmonds. Here. Representative Falconer. Here. Representative Foyle. Representative Harris. Here. Representative Hinskins. Representative Hodges. Here. Representative Jackson. Here. Representative Leger. Here. Representative McFarland. Here. Representative Miguez. Here. Representative Miller. Here. Representative Pylant. Representative Richard. Representative Simon. Representative Smith. Here. Representative Stokes. Here. Representative Zarang. President Alario. Here. President Alain. Senator Alain.
Oh, okay. That's a better place for you.
Here. Senator Appel. Here. Senator Barrow. Here. Senator Bishop. Here. Senator Chabert. Here. Senator Donahue. Here. Senator Fannin. Here. Senator Hewitt. Here. Senator Johns. Here. Senator LaFleur. Senator Long. Here. Senator Martini. Here. Senator Morrell. Senator Morrish. Here. Senator Tarver. Here. Senator Thompson. Here. Senator Walsworth. Here. Senator White. Here. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Item number 1, fiscal status statement. Yes, ma'am.
Ternesa Hutchinson with the Office of Planning and Budget presenting the fiscal status statement, item number 1 on the agenda. The January fiscal status reflects the actions that were taken at the Revenue Estimating Conference of an increase in revenue of $152.7 million. This increase in the REC brings an anticipated excess of $152.7 million to the general fund. On page 2 of the fiscal status statement, there is a change. The statutory requires 1/3 of the revenue from the DPS driver's license fees to be deposited into a separate fund at the end of the year. This action took place after the original calculation was done of the surplus. So the adjusted general fund less appropriation requirement line is changing from $129.1 million down to $122.6 million. With your permission, I will handle 5A, which is the certification by the commissioner on behalf of the commissioner for the actual revenues paid by warrant and transfer. The certification in accordance with this statute.
Could you speak a little closer to the mic? Some of our members are having trouble here. The mic will move there.
Okay. With your permission, I'll handle item 5A, the certification on behalf of the commissioner. The surplus from 16-17 is $122,619,960.
Okay. Just for housekeeping, we have an overflow room in committee room 6. If anybody is here in standing room only, if you need to, committee room 6. Okay, go ahead. Now, the quick question, for the 152.7, we can appropriate that in the surplus, correct? And then the 122.6 million, that's what has to go to the five or six dedicated areas, is that correct?
Yes, sir, the 122 is according to the Constitution, that ways that you can spend it. The 152 is excess in the current year.
So it has to be, obviously, in the supplemental bill is when
Yes,
that would be
sir.
appropriated? Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. I see no questions. Thank you, ma'am. All right. The executive budget for 18-19? Members, I do believe, I have a presentation. I think everybody has received a copy at this point. Has anybody not received a copy of the presentation?
Thank you.
Are you all putting this on the screen?
Yes, sir.
He will, I
Oh,
won't.
all right.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. And in reference to your question, obviously I'll be followed by Jay in a few minutes, who's got a lot more detailed information for you. But I want to make it very clear at the outset that the budget proposal that we are presenting to you this morning is not one that I'm excited about. It's not the one that I want to be presenting to you today. It's the one that I believe I'm constitutionally obligated to deliver today. Quite frankly, it's the budget that I'm forced to present to you today because of our inability thus far to enact lasting reforms that we need in this state. The realities of the fiscal cliff are reflected in the budget proposal that's before you, and it represents a loss of revenue from temporary measures passed by the legislature in both 2015 and 2016. So in a few moments, Commissioner Darden is going to go into the details. He will explain each agonizing cut that had to be made in order to balance a budget that is $1 billion less than the current year's general fund balance. Once he's done, I'm confident that none of you will want to be sending this budget to my desk for approval. I don't think it's possible to pass a budget, in fact, that makes cuts at this level. But before I give you a picture of what's in the budget, I'm going to mention a few things that you won't find. There's not a single cut to the Department of Veterans Affairs. This is not an area that I ever want to cut from, but I'm certainly not okay even taking a dime from the Department of Veterans Affairs while we have hundreds of Louisiana men and women overseas at this moment risking their lives for our freedom. We've also been able to preserve funding for our military department and the Inspector General. We've protected Children and Family Services so they can continue their important work. And in fact, last year, DCFS had a record number of adoptions, surpassing the all-time previous record that had just been set the year before. I don't want to slow that momentum, and I know they have an awful lot of other things that they do that are critically important as well. We also protected K-12 schools from deep cuts, so our children's education is not needlessly threatened. Unfortunately, that's where our ability to spare critical priorities from deep cuts ends. As you all know, there's $9.6 billion in state general fund in the current fiscal year. That number falls to $8.6 billion next year. That is the fiscal cliff. We have approximately $3.4 billion of the state general fund that can actually be cut. And as you know, the two big pots of funding on that side of the discretionary state general fund ledger are higher education and health care. And the biggest cuts had to come from those two areas. It's simple arithmetic. Therefore, you're going to find drastic cuts to health care, corrections, higher education, and yes, TOPS. This is because the budget proposal is based on $8.6 billion in state general fund. And it's noteworthy that that is almost $2 billion less than the state general fund in the 2007-8 budget of 10 years ago. And the amount of non-discretionary spending required in law has actually increased greatly over the last 10 years. So I want to be clear. This is not the budget that I want to present to you, and it is certainly not the budget that I want implemented. But these are the choices that have to be made when $1 billion in revenue is set to roll off the books and has not yet been replaced. This is what falling off the cliff looks like. For those of you who insist that we can cut our way out of this, identify the cuts, but be specific. Don't hide behind a claim that the legislature doesn't pass budgets, that you don't make cuts, that all you do is appropriate. That's nonsense. It's your constitutional obligation. I've made more than $600 million in state general fund spending cuts in the 2 years that I've been in office. And if we can identify other areas where cuts can be responsibly made without harming the people of Louisiana, I'm certainly willing to work with you on those cuts. We should always strive to make government more efficient, but we can't sit here and honestly say that this problem can be solved simply by cutting. If that's what you believe, I can respect it, but stand up and show the people of Louisiana what you want to cut. Contrary to what some might say, I'm not trying to use fear tactics. In fact, none of these cuts should come as a shock to any of you, because we've already been here before. This is basically the same problem that I sat here 2 years ago asking you to work with me then on a permanent fix. I did so again last year before the 2017 fiscal session. Let me remind you, this problem exists because the previous administration left us with a $2 billion budget shortfall and a budget that was propped up by using one-time funds, more than $860 million, to pay for recurring expenses. This is a problem that was 8 years in the making. You chose to temporarily patch up the problem for 27 months, and the day of reckoning is at hand. Since taking office, I proposed a balanced approach of cuts, savings, and revenue to address our problems. While we made some incredibly hard cuts, you also chose to pass temporary revenue measures instead of long-term tax reform. I was promised, more importantly, the people of Louisiana were promised, that those measures would serve as a bridge until the 2017 fiscal session. But when the legislature had the opportunity to dive deep into the budget and make necessary reforms, with the benefit of recommendations from a task force that you created specifically for that purpose, you didn't take it. In fact, not one bill based on the task force recommendations to advance tax reform and address the fiscal cliff ever made it out of the Ways and Means Committee in the 2017 fiscal session. Not one. So the problems haven't changed, and the solutions haven't changed. The only thing that continues to change is the amount of time that we have left to summon the courage to make the tough decisions. And our window of opportunity continues to shrink every day. I know this isn't easy, but I also know it's not going to be easier later. And the longer we wait, the more damage we cause. To say that I am frustrated would be an understatement, but I suspect that's true for many of you as well. And I know it's true for the people of Louisiana who want and deserve for us to fix this problem. They've sent us here to make difficult but sensible decisions, and I believe it's time that we must fix the structural issues plaguing our state. There's still time to come together and responsibly get this done. That's the good news. We need to do it in a special session next month. On that, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and I are all in agreement. The responsible thing to do is to fix the cliff in a special session in February. If we wait until June, all of our state agencies and partner hospitals will have to assume that this is the budget that's going to be implemented, and they're going to have to plan accordingly and make decisions including the reductions to staff. And this comes just when we're showing signs of life. With lower unemployment, we would be taking a dramatic step backwards. We will risk receiving more credit downgrades. Families are going to have a difficult time planning for tuition costs, and thousands of hardworking private sector employees will receive layoff notices on about May the 1st. However, while I agree that we need to do this in February, I'm not willing to call a special session just for the sake of calling it. I will insist upon an agreement in principle between myself and legislative leadership on a permanent and responsible fix to the cliff. I've already told you that I'm willing to be extremely flexible, and I believe that I've proven that to be the case. So work with me. Tell me what aspects of my plan you can live with, and for the parts that you can't, bring me your own plan. I welcome disagreement, but let's not disagree for the sake of disagreeing, and let's try to disagree without being disagreeable. Offer your own ideas. I welcome the discussions. In fact, I've pleaded for them. We can find common ground, but as I sit here, I do not have a plan or any part of a plan from House leadership that addresses this cliff. I cannot negotiate with myself. It doesn't work that way. I've been traveling the state for the past 6 months discussing our budget issues with business leaders and local elected officials all over the state. And I have to tell you that I received the same feedback from just about every one of the individuals with whom I met. They want us to fund higher education and workforce development. They want a healthy workforce. They want us to invest in Louisiana's roads and infrastructure so they can get their products to market. They also want a tax system that is predictable, stable, and fair. And they want us to stabilize the budget and invest in our priorities so they can plan for the future and know that their long-term investments will yield a profitable return. This budget, this year, should serve as a turning point for our state. Make no mistake about it. We have real momentum today in the state of Louisiana. Right now, we have fully stabilized higher education. We have fully funded TOPS in the current year. And because of that stability, all of our higher education systems are seeing a significant increase in admission requests for next year. By protecting funding for higher education, we're also able to land the largest economic development deal in our state's history in direct permanent jobs at one site, DXC Technology in New Orleans. By the way, it was the second best economic development deal in the country last year. Would not have been possible had we not stabilized our state general fund support for higher education. And workforce development will be the key to future investments as well as job growth and job creation. Our unemployment rate is at the lowest point it's been since May of 2008. We are actually seeing wage growth as well. Our state is undeniably doing better, but even more important, so are our families. And while we still have a ways to go, and I'm the first to admit that, there have been positive developments relating to our budget. And in fact, we closed the books on the last fiscal year, my first full fiscal year in office, with a $123 million surplus. You just discussed that. REC upgraded the forecast for the current fiscal year by $153 million, meaning for the first time in many, many years, no destabilizing mid-year cuts to state agencies to higher education. Moreover, REC upgraded the forecast for next fiscal year by $233 million. This is positive. It is helpful. It's certainly much better than making a change to the negative, which adds to the scope of our problem. But it does not come close to solving our problem, which is the cliff. Now, the fiscal cliff is $994 million based on the most recent REC forecast. The difference between the current REC forecast for this year's budget and the current forecast for next year's state general fund. $994 million. The temporary revenue falling off the books June 30th, however, and that gives rise to the cliff, is actually $1.38 billion according to the House Fiscal Office. Because of the improved forecast, I propose to replace only $994 million of that $1.38 billion with permanent revenue. Surely we can do this. But even when we do, as Jay's going to mention to you in just a moment, there will still be painful cuts. Tax reform that produces a structure that is stable, predictable, and fair and permanent, and one that replaces $1.38 billion with $994 million, we can do this. As you've heard me say time and time again throughout the state over the past year, I believe Louisiana is on the cusp of prosperity the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. I still believe it. I'm as optimistic today as I have ever been. But I call upon you, let's join together. Let's prove that we are not Washington, D.C. The federal government today is needlessly shut down as congressional leaders have proven themselves either unwilling or unable to sit down and talk, and more importantly, to listen to one another and to compromise. Rather, each side plays to their base, and neither is sufficiently concerned about the country as a whole. And I actually think there's a majority in Congress to do everything that each side says they want to do right now, but the government is still shut down. I happen to believe that about this problem, too. There's a majority in this legislature, in the House and in the Senate, who want to permanently fix this cliff and allow Louisiana to move forward and prosper, and to create the situations where our businesses and our families prosper as well. So let's prove that we are better than what's going on in Washington. Our people demand it, and they deserve it. So Louisiana's ready, and I'm ready. The only question is, are you? Let's get it done. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take some questions if you have any, and then I'll obviously be followed by Commissioner Darden.
All right, members, there's no names on this, so is that you? But hold lower. Okay, thanks. Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Governor, for this presentation. I had a chance to look at the budget this morning. It is a very ugly budget, and I'm certain this is not the budget that you want to present to us today. And it is my hope that we come together as Republicans, as Democrats, and we do what's best for the state of Louisiana, and we put the people of this state over politics. And so thank you for your leadership on this, Governor. And I know, I got an opportunity to know you over the last 2 years, and I know this is not the budget that you want to present today.
It's not, and I told you all that the cuts are far deeper in every area than I think serves the state's best interest. There is not a cut on the list in the magnitude that we have it down in order to close the cliff that I think is good for the state. But it is my constitutional obligation, and you're not going to find in the budget document contingent spending. You're not going to find one-time money, because I continue to believe that the best way forward is to be able to have an honest conversation about where we're at. You can't have an honest conversation if you don't have an honest document in front of you. So it's honest, but it's ugly.
But I think the state needs honesty and truth. And so thank you for the transparency. I do have 2 quick questions for you, and I won't take up much of your time. My very first question is about TOPS. Mm-hmm. Following last year's sessions, a TOPS task force was formed where we studied various recommendations for TOPS. What should it look like going forward? One of the questions that was proposed to the task force, and it's my question before you today, is if TOPS is not fully funded, like it is in this proposed budget, where TOPS is now essentially $35 million funded, should those cuts be allocated equally to all kids, like the law is currently structured, or whether or not priority should be given to those children who have the highest ACT, or whether or not priority should be given to those children who come from tough financial circumstances, or whether or not you propose some hybrid approach that looks to protect those kids with the highest GPA, but also give priority to those children who come from very tough financial circumstances. I'd just like overarching your thoughts on the subject matter.
What I propose is that we pay for TOPS, 100% of it. That's as simple as straightforward as I can be. I want to pay for TOPS.
And I think we all do.
Yeah.
I have-
So let's get it done. We can do it. You know, this was I think the first question I got 2 years ago when we presented our first executive budget proposal that was premised upon a $2 billion shortfall. And the first question came about TOPS. I said it then, I'll say it today. I want to fully fund TOPS, just like I want to fund our partner hospitals and our DAs and our sheriffs and all the other things that are critically important about our budget.
One final question to you, Governor. I know your budget protects veterans.
Yes.
I certainly appreciate the importance of veterans, and I agree 100% with your approach to protect them. I'm looking at your budget, and to the Department of Elderly Affairs, there's a $1.5 million cut that will close senior centers in Orleans and Jefferson Parish. And just like we're going to protect our veterans, Governor, I would like us across party lines, across the state, let's all agree to protect our seniors. Let's make sure that there's not one gray hair is harmed in our budget. And I certainly would appreciate whatever commitment you can give us today to make certain that whatever budget is finally passed, that it will absolutely protect all the seniors across the state of Louisiana.
That's my goal. Along with all the other cuts that you see, that is not one that I support actually implementing, the cut to the senior centers. Again, this is part of the process that we went through 2 years ago as well, and we ended up with a responsible budget. The only thing that wasn't responsible is it was based upon short-term revenue. Now it's time to make permanent the revenue to replace what is falling off the table. Not asking for net new revenue on those items.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Representative Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Governor, for your straightforward presentation this morning. In follow-up to some of the questions, one of the things that is deeply concerning about the reduction of TOPS and why I know you support funding it so much is because it amounts for a significant amount of investment in higher education. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, though I know we've worked hard in this terrible budget situation that we find ourselves in to present a constitutional plan that would reduce higher education by a small amount in state general fund, this TOPS funding is ultimately funding for higher education, is it not?
Well, it is. Now, to be fair, it hasn't always been considered that. In fact, there was a time when it was not in the budget as state support for higher education. It was relocated and is put in its current position in order to mask the state general fund cuts to higher education that occurred in the previous administration over the last 7 of the 8 years. But it is support for higher education in the sense that I absolutely believe that had we not fully funded TOPS for the current year and funded higher education without any state general fund reductions from the previous year, that we would not have the request for admissions where we are. We wouldn't have our universities and our community and technical colleges stabilized. So I absolutely support fully funding TOPS. But you can't fund what you can't afford, right, and you can't invest what you don't have.
And to that end, I wanted to make sure that we recap some of the comments that you made because I think they're critically important to just have sink in. The numbers that I've seen show that in FY 2008 we had a $10.4 billion state general fund expenditure. In FY 18 we had a $9.4 billion state general fund expenditure, so $1 billion less. Mm-hmm. And as we sit here today, with the REC projections as they are, about $993 million less than that at about $8.6 billion. So over the last decade, a significant reduction in expenditure of state general funds, even if we do replace these temporary revenues that have fallen off the books. It looks to me like 1.38 billion, and I think you said this, $1.38 billion less revenue coming in,
On those items that
I mean,
fall off the books.
correct.
Yeah, that comes from your fiscal office.
and only 993 million of what you're asking for, basically to try to do-
994.
994. I don't want to shortchange you.
That's right. No, that's right. But the other part of that I think is important to note, and this is why Jay doesn't have very much flexibility at all in fashioning these budget proposals and identifying cuts. It isn't just that over 10 years, $2 billion in state general fund has been lost. If you add the $1 billion that's on the cliff, it's $1 billion in the current fiscal year. But on the non-discretionary items, though, the law requires for that and tells us how much that's going to be, and those items have actually gotten more expensive. Right. And so you're losing general fund on the one hand, and you're increasing your non-discretionary amount of expenditures on the other, and you're just getting squeezed like heck in the middle.
And that actually, MFP is a great example. 2.8 billion in 2008, 3.4 billion in 18 and 19. So non-discretionary. No way for us to not fund it, but $1 billion less revenue and about 650 million more required for K through 12 education.
Yeah, and I think I don't remember exactly, over that same period of time, there were only, I think, 2 full 2.75% increases in the MFP. I think there was one partial. The vast majority of that has to do with student count.
And there's also a couple $100 million more in general obligation debt service, and also about $50 million more, $30 million more in supplemental pay. So all of these non-discretionary functions in an environment where state general fund has actually decreased over the last decade, but our responsibilities have increased, further compounding our ability or our lack of ability to try to deliver just what we delivered last year in this environment. And so, again, I appreciate your candor, and as always, look forward to working with you to try to make sure we can deliver what the people of the state have told us they require in order for us to grow. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Representative McFarland, you have your button question? Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Representative.
First question I have is, would you please explain how this budget will affect our primary health care services?
Well, Jay's got a much more extensive list to go through with you in a moment, and because that is where a huge portion of the cuts are focused in the executive budget proposal. And then you've got the general fund component, and you've got the federal funding component of those as well. I mean, could I do it? I probably could, but that's coming at you in just a moment.
Okay, I'll wait for Jay.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Either Representative Smith or Representative Billiot, one of the two. Representative Billiot. Okay.
Governor, we seems that we touch on the education part of it, and we touch some on the healthcare, and it's going to be more in depth as we go forward. Could you just maybe give us some comments about mortar and brick and highways and the state transportation system?
Well, yeah, as you know, we don't typically fund a whole lot of the state's infrastructure, highway, bridge infrastructure, through our operating budget. But through the operating budget, we do pay for bond sales, and we service our debt. Yes. And quite frankly, I don't see us, if we don't fix the cliff, having any additional capital outlay for next year, and that's one of the things that that Jay is going to go through as well. And so it absolutely has a tremendous impact on the infrastructure at that level. And even though we've had a much smaller capital outlay budget since I've been governor, we've had a larger percentage of the capital outlay directed to the Highway Priority Program. Certainly, that is at risk if we don't fix this problem, fix the cliff.
Thank you.
Senator Barrow.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Mr. Governor.
Good morning, Senator.
First of all, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you giving us a very straightforward budget, one that's not filled with smoke and mirrors, with a lot of one-time dollars, and then have to come back and have to look at making budget cuts. I want you to know how much I really appreciate that, because being here for a while, I can been through that a couple of times, and knowing who you are, knowing your character and everything, I just want to let you know that I share your frustration. Not only do I share your frustration, but I'm a little angry, because I'm angry that we are having to put many of my friends that I see in the audience who are here today to share with us their concerns, and ask us not to cut waiver services. It always angers me when we have to have them come here and have to plead with us and ask us not to do that. But I do want to ask you this, because you mentioned something that I want to make sure it's not lost in this conversation. You talked about timing. You talked about us having a session in February as opposed to June, and the importance of that. And I believe that there are some who believe that what's happening today is really not as important because we have a little bit more time. But I really would like for you to really reemphasize that, because I don't want that to be lost in translation about the timing of when we begin to take action.
Well, we didn't do it at the best time. Our last scheduled fiscal session before the fiscal cliff was last year. But the next best time is the earliest possible time, which is in February, and I think that that's the right thing to do. And if we don't, I will predict to you that you're not going to pass a budget. You're not going to pass capital outlay. And so we would be relegated to a short 3-week session at the end of June to try to fix the cliff, pass a budget, and pass capital outlay, and that's just not the way to govern. You're sure to make mistakes when you do it in such a hurried fashion, and you can't make mistakes on these things. They're too important. But also, you've got lots of decisions that have to be made, not just by government, but by families.
That's right.
Between now and then. Where are the kids going to go to school? Are they going to re-enroll for next semester at whatever university or community or technical college they've got? If you're a high school senior, where are you going to go to college? How are you going to come up with the additional tuition dollars? If you're in the private sector working for one of our partner hospitals that is not funded, they have to send layoff notices on May the 1st, 60 days. Now, you may fix it at the end of June, but how many of those people will have found a different job in the meantime? How much instability do you want to cause? All to deal with a problem that is fully before us today. The solutions are fully before us today. The problem doesn't change. The solutions don't change. So I really think that we ought to do it. And I would just remind you, we've had all these discussions.
That's right.
And we've heard from all the people who were behind me and those who were going to come and testify to you all. And as a result, in a year when we had a $2 billion deficit, we chose the level of government that we have because that was the minimum we thought we needed to have. And I will tell you, I still believe that that's the case. And if you look into those cuts, and by the way, when we're finished today, this budget is yours. You get to take the dollars and rearrange them and move the cuts wherever you want to move them within the discretionary set of general fund expenditures. But you get to do that. But we really ought to fix this issue in February, because when you lose the $1 billion and the total effect when you count federal dollars is likely to be somewhere around $2.5 billion, you cannot rearrange that in a way that's going to produce a budget that will get the support of the majority of the members of the House and the Senate. So let's fix it now.
Well, I agree with you, Governor. It should have already been done, but since it has not been done, well, we need to go ahead and get the job done. We need to gear up, and we need to put on our big girl clothes and our big boy clothes, and we need to get the job done. So I thank you for it. I want to say something else, but I decided not to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I risked my life getting here, so I'm going to ask all the questions I want. I was riding with Representative Marcus Hunter this morning. He was speeding through rain that was unbelievable. So so I feel like I deserve to take all the time I want today. Mr. Governor, I've heard a lot of questions about cuts already as people have been quizzing you about this budget, but as I understand it, this is not your budget, right? This is not the budget you would have brought.
Well, it's certainly not a budget that I want to bring. It's not a budget I want implemented. There's not a cut on the list that I support making. But at the end of the day, I am obligated by the Constitution to deliver a balanced budget proposal. It's premised on a loss of $1 billion from this year to next, and that is very, very nasty in terms of the cuts that I have to propose. But I'm only proposing them if you don't fix the problem. What I'm really asking you to do is fix the problem.
What you've been asking us to do since you were elected, am I correct?
It's been over 2 years. Yes, ma'am.
And when you were a member with us, you advocated for fixing the problem because we knew it was here, right?
Not only that, I joined together with a number of folks here, including Representative Henry, to try to cut back on the amount of one-time money that was used to prop up the budget year after year by lining it up against recurring expenditures. Because it was not just predictable, it was predicted, the problems that we were creating for ourselves. Which is why I have yet to present a budget to you that calls for a single one-time dollar lined up against recurring expenditures.
Yeah, you've been very consistent in not spending one-time money. You've been very consistent in urging us to fix the problem, and I want to commend you for that. But I want people to understand, because right now this budget is being presented by you, but you're not in support of it. The truth is, with the discretionary funds you had to allocate in your budget, some of those state funds are mandatorily placed in other have to be appropriated, like to the K through 12 MFP. So you have no discretion over that.
It isn't some of them. It's about 2/3 of our state general
Right.
fund is dedicated, and so you end up with I think it's about $3.5 billion from which to cut the billion. That's what makes it so nasty.
And so it's not like you could have cut, let's say, MFP. You couldn't have cut elections. That's mandatory. Revenue sharing, supplemental pay, those are all the things. And so when you were left with what you were left with, because we haven't acquiesced to come into session and fix the problem, these are the cuts that are resulting.
Correct. I think that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, so if we were to do our job in February and come in and put our heads together and come up with revenue, then we could save tops, right?
Yeah, but I'm asking you let's put our heads together now.
Right, in February,
so
that's
that we
what I
can come
said.
up with a plan
Yes.
and actually be successful in February. But you're right.
We could save now waivers.
Sure.
We could save pediatric daycare.
Sure.
So there are a lot of things that's in this budget you're not advocating for, and if we're not advocating for it, we should be willing to come in and fix the problem, right?
Yeah, it's different than that. There's not a cut in that budget proposal that I'm advocating for. Not a
Right.
single one.
And I think also you urging us to come in early and fix this problem takes into account what we're doing to higher education institutions, right?
Correct. And the other part of that about higher education, I am absolutely convinced that more than ever, the future of this state in terms of investment, job creation, the ability to have economic development wins is tied to workforce development. It is tied to maintaining our support and actually investing more over time as we're able to do it in education. Really all of education, but I'm going to single out higher education, because when I meet with CEOs who are trying to figure out whether they're going to invest more here to expand their current operations or they're going to invest here for the first time, they want to know that they're going to be successful. And the key to success for them, more than anything else, will they have the workers who are skilled and trained and educated to do the job that they need them to do? And if we can guarantee them of that, they come to Louisiana.
Right.
And if we can't, they're going to go somewhere else. And so we cut higher education at our own peril.
So let's take the community colleges, for example, the community and technical colleges where a lot of our workforce training occurs. If we wait until a June session, let's just go there, This legislature, not you, waits into a June session to try to fix this problem. That doesn't give the colleges and much time to budget for classes and professors and things that's needed for training, right?
Not only that, the students don't know whether they're going to go or not. And, you know, I know that he's been engaged on this. President Monty Sullivan has been talking to me, and I suspect been talking to all of you, as have all of our other higher education leaders, about the need to fix this in February and not in June because of the destabilizing impact it will have, not just on the institutions, but on the students and their families.
Right, and I have not been an advocate, you have, and I understand why, of fully funding TOPS when we have a deficit. But I received an email that supports your position on fully funding TOPS. Because I received an email the other day from my district office from a parent, and you know, up in North Louisiana, they sometimes call us South Arkansas. And she talked about how her child was going to attend a college in Arkansas because the tuition was cheaper than Louisiana's tuition. However, because he was awarded TOPS, he was able to attend a college in Louisiana and is now working as a certified math teacher in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I thought that was important because what she said at the end of it, and when I called, what really came out from my legislative assistant is this: our students are choosing what college to attend now, those seniors. And I say all that story to say this. And so right now, while we're wrestling on whether we're going to correct this issue, students are right now selecting colleges. And without the guarantee of TOPS for some who earned it, they're going to select that college in Arkansas, in Mississippi, and other places that's cheaper than all Louisiana tuition. I mean, because we didn't fix this problem, Mr. Governor, we increased tuition and gave them the latitude to increase tuition at every college. So we're pricing our children out of education. We're guaranteeing them TOPS is going to cover it, and then we're telling them in January that we don't know if we're going to fund TOPS because we have $1 billion deficit. And those are some of the things for me that grow quite concerning as we begin to compete for recruiting, or whether LSU can, or Southern or other universities can actually advertise for professorships. They don't know what their money's going to look like. They don't know what the budget is. They don't know whether they're going to be able to fill those positions. And so many people, and let me say this, I enjoy football. I come from a football family. But so many people are looking at LSU football team and saying, are we going to win? We can't even recruit right now. They don't know how many classes they're going to offer. People are looking at whether or not we're going to be viable universities. It's based on our what classes they're going to offer, whether they're going to be able to graduate in 4 years. And so I've joined you in urging us to fix this, because if we wait too long, we lose wonderful recruits at our colleges and universities all over the state. We lose the ability to hire professors that we really need. And then some professors move because they're tired of having to wonder whether or not their projects are going to be funded, whether they're going to have enough student enrollment in their classes. Yeah. What I'm saying to you is I understand why you're urging us. This is a real life problem. We have students constantly moving out of our states because we play with TOPS every year, and that's coming from someone who didn't advocate to fully fund TOPS when we had a major deficit. But hearing the stories and talking to my students who work in my office as they apply to other colleges and universities outside of our state, they're saying, listen, it's too unstable, Rep. Jackson. Why would I stay in Louisiana? I have a partial scholarship somewhere else that's similar to TOPS. Why wouldn't I go there and I'm guaranteed to have that partial scholarship for 4 years? So I join you in urging our legislative body to fix the issue. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you that you've been real with the people of the state of Louisiana.
And Marcus is responsible for all this, right?
Yes.
Look,
you should have been in that car with him at 5:38 a.m. when he was driving.
Let's fully fund TOPS. I think if you had King Alexander up here right now, he would tell you, and my numbers may be slightly off. I don't think so. Right now, requests for admissions at LSU from in-state students are up 28%. Mm-hmm. For out-of-state students, it's over 50%. All because we stabilized our support for higher education, state general fund. We didn't invest more. We just, for the first time in about 8 or 9 years, did not cut them. And we fully funded TOPS. Surely we can do that again. We need to do that again.
I agree, Mr. Governor, and I agree to support TOPS when we fix the rest of the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Governor, I hope that Bishop Ricard gave you enough Holy Ghost to get through this whole session yesterday. But I'd like to say that I too understand the dilemma that we're in, looking at the discretionary funds that we have to work with and putting together a budget. My question goes into healthcare. The issues that we know, we've got people sitting here, we've got people listening, and it deals with our public-private partnerships, as well as our rural hospital funding, as well as the MCO contracts that we just got into. Do any of these get affected by the issues that we have in the budget?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, they do. And it's certainly just like the rest of the budget proposal when it comes to cuts. What you have before you are a list of cuts that we should not make. They're not in our state's best interest. I don't know that we would have a single partner left in terms of partner hospitals in the state of Louisiana. If you look at where the vast majority of discretionary state general fund dollars are, they're higher education and healthcare, but healthcare is much, much bigger. Healthcare is also where you generate the most federal match. And of course, all of that revenue, whether it's state, general fund, or federal revenue, is what goes to pay for the services that you're talking about. And in a few minutes, I'm hoping in a few minutes, Jay Darden's going to walk you through what those cuts will look like. But they are really, really nasty. And quite frankly, you're limited in many cases in healthcare to making cuts that are penny wise and pound foolish, because you can cut some programs that are going to increase your cost in other programs that you maintain by more than you saved. But we still have no choice but to present to you what is at the outset of the fiscal year a balanced budget proposal. And so when you go through and look at it and you ask yourself tough questions, well, why does it make sense to make this cut over here if it's just going to drive people to a more expensive setting to receive their services? Well, it doesn't make sense. We don't want to do it. But we have to cut in order to meet the revenue on hand. And so you're going to see that there are many instances like that. And so those are not cuts that we can recommend either, Representative Smith.
And I appreciate that. I think that everybody in the legislature in some way, shape, or form has some kind of connection with one of our partner hospitals. And in looking at that, I would hope that they would be cognizant of the fact that if we make those cuts and we force people to go into emergency rooms no matter what, or just not get health care, that we're putting the lives of our citizens in Louisiana in a lot of danger. And so I'm hoping that will ring bells in the heads of many of our legislators, so that we'll be doing something to fix this now to come into session in February. Thank you very much for being here.
Senator Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Governor, I want to talk a little bit about higher education, but not so much about TOPS. We've talked about that a great deal, and I understand that. But one thing I think that gets lost in our higher ed conversation, and we talk about actually cutting. I have 6 universities in my Senate district, and so when I take a look at these numbers here, when I discount the reductions for the Board of Regents, and I look just at the 4 university systems across the entire state, I get a total of $25 million that these university systems will be responsible for. And in it, I've worked in higher education for the last 23 years or so. I realize what happens with that. Every university last week was in registration trying to make the determination as to what classes are going to be offered, what they were going to actually have, and things along those lines. And part of my concern is that sometimes we spend so much time talking about TOPS and making sure that we have a first-class benefit for the residents here in the state of Louisiana. We don't talk about providing first-class universities for that benefit that students will be trying to use. My concern is that when we take a look at that $24 million, not counting the Board of Regents, what's the real day-to-day effect on these 4 university system heads and the challenges that they're going to have to meet and the cuts that they're going to have to make in the day-to-day lives of universities across the state?
Well, they are cuts that we don't want them to have to make, and as to how they would make them, I suspect each of them has slightly different ideas, and you all are going to hear from them at the appropriate time. But as a general matter, from a high altitude, we don't want to cut higher education again. We've got 1 year in a row right now. 1 year in a row is all we have at stabilizing higher education, and we can already see the benefits that are flowing from that. We don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. But at the end of the day, they do consume general fund. We have a shortage of general fund, and it is an area of the cut an area of the budget where those cuts can be made, but they should not be made. Not there, and not in TOPS. The last thing we can afford to do is get back on the road we were on, when we every year cut state general fund support for higher education. In order to do that, we had to give tuition authority to the universities to try to make up for that. And at the end of the day, they weren't able to fully make up for it, but we had state general fund reductions over a 10-year period, or 8-year period, I guess it was, that were the highest in the nation, and corresponding tuition increases that were the highest in the nation. And by the way, that's what made our TOPS program so expensive to fund. So it's not a road we want to get back on. We've been down that road. We know where it brings us. And so let's get it fixed.
And Governor, I agree with you. Long before I went to the Senate, I served on House Education. So what you're saying now is something you hadn't said for the last 5 or 6 years. So you're very consistent in what you say. And we talk about the previous administration that massacred higher education. And anybody that's being true about the last administration will actually say that. The university system heads will actually say that. So I commend you for taking the step, although a 1-year step, but a step to try and put us on the right direction. And we saw that we were losing students time and time again because our university just couldn't afford to compete with the budget they were forced to deal with. So I commend you for what you did when you were a member of the House, and I commend you for keeping your word and trying to make sure that stays straight as the governor of the state of Louisiana.
Thank you.
Senator Bishop, you have 6 universities in your Senate district?
Southern University at New Orleans, University of New Orleans, Delgado, Dillard, LSU Health Science Center, and Sidney Collier.
Gotcha. Okay. Representative Edmonds for a question.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Governor. Thank you for being here today.
Good morning.
Since the federal, I know this is early on, but since the feds have taken a step of tax reform, the president signed into law, we believe there'll be some revenue that will be available to us, a significant piece of revenue. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on when you think the REC might recognize that. Is that your plan looking towards that? Obviously, we've heard from Secretary Robinson that money could be anywhere from $200 to $400 million. And I just wondered, I have another question, but I wonder what your position on.
I've never heard 400 except from you, and she assures me she didn't say that.
Well, we'll stay with 200 then, because I'm certain that we've heard in the 200 million range that there would be additional revenue because of the tax reform that's come federally.
Yeah, and look, I will tell you the same thing I told the speaker when we met the other day, and in fact, I think it was the same thing we talked at the meeting before that as well. Obviously, to the extent that the federal tax law changes benefit the state of Louisiana in terms of revenue, then that helps fix the problem. By whatever amount REC recognizes, and whenever REC recognizes it. And I don't know what that amount is going to be. I think the $200 million range is going to be much closer. And as far as when, I can't precisely tell you. But the good news is that it does help our problem. And to the extent that it comes from individual income tax payments, then it obviates the need to do what the task force recommended, and that is to otherwise undertake measures that would cause for more revenue through the individual income tax. And so that's absolutely good news, because I think that would have been the hardest area to get agreement on in the numbers we would need to actually implement it. So for all of those reasons, it's good news, but to whatever extent it solves a problem, and whenever it solves it, that's great. And we can fully account for that in whatever plan that we can agree to.
We don't have any indication of, obviously it's been signed into law, we have any indication from the federal government of when we can begin to, obviously we make projections on federal monies all the time with all of our agencies. We make projections. Sometimes we don't have, the exact numbers we obviously have to project. Certainly REC is going to consider this. Do you have any idea of when there might be a possibility of that being recognized?
I don't. I would assume at one of the upcoming REC meetings, provided that Mr. Albrecht has prepared a note that is in his mind that he has the confidence in to actually recommend that the REC include it in the forecast. Now, the last thing that I saw, and I don't know whether it's final, and you get into trouble when you say things like this, I think it's about $220 million, $226 million, certainly not $400 million, that the fiscal office, the legislative fiscal office, is looking at in terms of that. It happens by operation of law, so I don't think technically we are waiting for the federal government to tell us anything. We just have to analyze what it is the federal government did. And it will happen by operation of law.
And I would assume then this $994 million you mentioned 15, 20 minutes ago, obviously you're not giving the number that reflects the 226 on this because you're not at liberty to do that yet. So would that number, do you see that number decreasing from 9? I think it's important that we have the confidence of aiming at the right number. I'm very concerned about that.
I can assure you I gave you the right number.
No, I didn't mean you to give us the right. I mean, the 994 would not include the 236. You're not ready to recognize that.
No, what I told you was the 994 is the difference in RE forecast for current year and next year.
Right.
That's it. It doesn't include whatever the federal tax law does to help us fix the cliff, then that gets applied against the 994. It is not yet applied. When it gets applied is up to REC. It's not up to me. But what we ought to figure out what that's going to be, when it's going to happen, because that's got to be part of our plan. And it ought to be one of the things that's the easiest for us to agree upon because it happens by operational law. We don't change any law as it relates to that.
Good. I just think it's healthy discussion that because we aim at the right number.
Correct.
And I'm not suggesting you've given an incorrect number.
No.
I'm just saying this is a new number. It's something we've got to deal with, and it's a good news number.
It is. And the other thing that I hope that you all recognize, and I know we talked a lot of numbers, is that I'm defining the cliff to be fixed as $994 million. The revenue items that fall off the books on June 30th amount to $1.38 billion. We ought to be able to do this.
My second question I had, Governor, relates to you've obviously centered in on Medicaid expansion. Have you had any news from the federal authorities of any changes that you see coming that could affect, good or bad, any budgeting items of any? Obviously, it's one of those things that we're concerned about. We're so heavily vested in it. Medicaid expansion, it's a lot of money. Any news of any changes you see coming down the pipe, good or bad, on monies, the share from federal government?
You're right. The Medicaid expansion is a lot of money, and in fact, it's to the good in the current fiscal year by more than $300 million that is being spent on other items. But it is very, very important. As of right now, there have been no changes in funding from the federal government related to the expansion population. So there's nothing that was unforeseen as it relates to paying for the expansion, which we did when we implemented. And in fact, the way we implemented Medicaid expansion pays the full 10% cost share, even though we're not yet at the full 10% cost share because of the provider fees that were enacted and because of the premium taxes on the MCOs that administer the program. But we have not received any information from the federal government that says that the Medicaid expansion will be cut or funded differently, or that we're required to come up with more than the share that we were supposed to come up with.
My final question is from last year's HB1, and Governor, you mentioned to us that you're flexible, that you want to work. When this House last year, we passed a budget that fully funded TOPS, did not make any cuts to many of the areas that you were extremely interested in. We found agreement in. We thought it was a very responsible way to budget. Numbers came down to 98% of REC's projections. You even, I think, had mentioned, not to me personally, but I believe you'd mentioned you're not against that kind of pattern of budgeting, but could have been the wrong timing, maybe. I don't want to misquote you, but it seemed to be what filtered down to us. I think it was a very good plan. Now we know we went into a surplus. It would have caused our numbers to have been down last year, which would have been now what you are projecting from, those numbers would have been lower, which would have even significantly more cut where this fiscal cliff was. But my bigger point is this. There's so many people in the state of Louisiana. Obviously, this hall is always packed when it comes down to appropriation. We all want the confidence to be able to work together, but going back to last year, there was no negotiations seemed to work. There was no flexibility at that point. It was a budget, this is what we're going to do, and that's it. That's the way it came back. That's the way I can only speak for myself. That's all I'm speaking for. That's the way I felt. I think it was a good idea to do the 98%. I was in favor of that. I'm glad that we, within that budget, fully funded TOPS and other areas that we all agree that were significantly important to our constituents and to the entirety of the state of Louisiana. But if we're going to work together, I really want to know that you're going to have some flexibility with us. That, and if you thought that was a bad idea, then I suppose that's your right. But I didn't see that flexibility then, and I'd certainly like to think we're going to move forward with the men and women, and not only in this group, but in the chambers, both sides, that we want to work together to fix this problem. I don't think anybody in their right mind wants to keep dealing with this. Governor, there's no one in here. And again, I shouldn't say that, because then I am speaking for other people. I can't imagine that there would be people that year in and year out want to do nothing but deal with a fiscal cliff and budgets that are failing. It's high time that we move forward together. I do agree with that. It's high time that this is a great time for a progressive Louisiana to move, and I agree with you that there are some great opportunities in front of us, and we don't want to miss any of that, whether it's higher education or whether it's business and industry that comes to our state, or it's educating our children that K through 12, or even things we do for early childhood. I think the heart is right. We just can't seem to get together on some of the head issues. And I welcome that opportunity, and if you have any response to that, but that word flexibility is one that I hope that if I see some of it, maybe you see none of it on our side, but I think that we've had a difficult time seeing some of it on your side as well.
Well, I agree with you that the current House Bill 1, the way we've put a budget together to fund the current year, was a good document. It was a responsible document. In fact, some people have called it the best budget in 10 years. I agree with that. It would not have been that way had we reduced it to 98.5% of the REC forecast, however. And the reason it was proffered to me that we needed to only incorporate 98.5% of the forecast into the budget was to hedge against what was sure to come, another mid-year deficit. Well, we don't have a mid-year deficit, Representative Evans. And do I agree with the concept that when you can, we ought to incorporate less than 100% of the forecast into the budget? Yes. I don't believe you do that in a year when you face a cliff and you're struggling to fund things that are critically important. So I have flexibility when it comes to that, but I'm not going to be flexible enough to do it this year because it is irresponsible to do it this year.
I was not speaking of this year, Governor. I was speaking of the last budget that was presented to you, which was last year.
That's right. And I'm trying to fund this year at last year's level, so it's the same answer.
I understand. Thank you for at least us having the discussion.
Senator Hewitt?
Besides, someone who I really admire in this process has given me advice for about 10 years. And that is to be firm but flexible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor.
Yes, ma'am.
We do all, I believe we do all support higher education And just for the record, I'd like to point out the fact that in your budget that you submitted last year, you had a 70% cut to TOPS. And it was the House Appropriations Committee that actually funded TOPS 100% and took the cuts somewhere else. And so the budget that came over to the Senate Finance Committee, HB1, had TOPS 100% funded. In Senate Finance, we actually added money to higher education. And so that victory lap that you're taking, I think we share that as well, because we added money to higher education and we added money to TOPS. And so I'd like to kind of be clear on the record on that.
Well, first of all, I don't think the record is unclear. We together chose to fully fund TOPS last year. The year before, it was not fully funded. I wanted to, but in the special sessions we had, in order to address the deficit that we inherited, there was not enough revenue to fix the problem. And so I can't remember exactly what the cut to TOPS was. I know it was front-loaded, I should say back-loaded into the spring semester. But that was in 2016.
Yeah, the budget.
That was.
I believe, sir, that the budget that you proposed last year did not have TOPS fully funded, and we added the money in the legislature. We added the money to fully fund TOPS in last year's budget.
Well, let's do it again.
I agree. Let's do it again. You gave
I'm
us a
ready to
much
do it.
bigger hurdle, though, to go from 80%.
I'm not giving you anything, Representative. I'm sorry, Senator Hewitt. I'm taking the money that's in the forecast, and we're budgeting against that. If you all had done what I asked you to do, I promise you there wouldn't be a cut in TOPS in my executive budget proposal this year. It was the short-term piecemeal approach that was taken by the legislature that sunsetted at 27 months, and that money goes away on June 30th. Absent that, you would not have that document in front of you that shows any cut to TOPS. And I have said it over and over again here today. I don't support that cut to TOPS any more than I support the cut to the DAs, the sheriffs, to higher education, to our partner hospitals, or any other critical health care, or anything else that's in it, including your 5% cut to the legislature, or the 5% cut to the judiciary. I don't support any of those.
So let's talk about what the options are. So there's multiple options, and the options that you tend to go to are those that have to do with revenue. So let's talk about the things that you've done to look at expenses. You talk a lot about the task force report, the Budget and Tax Reform Task Force. As you know, the majority of the work that they delivered had to do with taxes. There was not very much work or airtime given to budget reform. But they did quote the Streamlining Commission as work that had previously been done that would be good to be implemented. Many of those recommendations had already been implemented, many of them had not. So my question to you is, did you all look at that, and have you gone forward with implementing those things that were recommended from the Streamlining Commission work to reduce your expenses?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that a great deal of the projected savings that came from the Streamlining Commission were never realized. Now, they would decide how much an agency would save if it implemented those recommendations. They would budget to that number, and then the agency didn't realize the savings, and that's how we ended up, part of the reason we ended up with so many mid-year budget cuts. Secondly, when it comes to actions I've taken on the expense side, Senator, I have cut over $600 million state general fund in the 2 years I've been governor. Now, that is the most significant action that I can take as governor on the expense side. And those cuts have not been easy.
And help me understand that, Governor, because I'm having a hard time reproducing those numbers, the 600 million.
Well, I'll give you the list, but it is simple arithmetic. We had a $2 billion deficit for the first full year that I was governor. You raised revenue to address part of that. That revenue expires on June 30th. We're not here looking for $2 billion. You didn't raise $2 billion. You raised far less than that. And the difference is the cuts. Had I not cut money, we would still have a $2 billion problem.
guess
But
the-
I have a complete list of cuts that I'm happy to give you, all of state general fund dollars. And it adds up to more than $600 million.
I guess maybe my definition of a cut is different than yours. I mean, a $600 million cut, I would think, would be a difference, a reduction in state general fund dollars from one year to the next. And what I'm looking at is $8.7 billion in fiscal year 16, 9.1 in fiscal year 17, 9.4 in fiscal year 18 appropriated. I don't get the $600 million cut.
Well, I'll show you the list, and one of the things you're not taking into consideration are the required services that are imposed on us by law that we have to fund that go up every year. So if you, I mean, I can explain it to you. I can't understand it for you, and I'm not trying to be ugly about that.
Insulting.
But
That
it's
is
more.
insulting.
No, but I'm not trying to be. It's more than just the difference in state general fund. You've got to look at the increases in state services that are required by laws that you all have passed and you haven't repealed them. And so it's not as easy as simply adding and subtracting one year's numbers to the next. You've got to really get into those numbers. But I have the list of more than $600 million in cuts. I'm absolutely happy to give them to you.
That would be great. I would love to see that because I do believe that that $600 million in cuts cannot be you adding to your wish list or adding inflation and then cutting. That doesn't count as a cut. It has to
That's
be
not what we did.
$600 less in state general revenue when you compare one year to the next, and I don't see it in the numbers that have been provided by our fiscal staff.
Yeah.
Senator Hewitt, well, I think one of the things, probably the confusion may lie, if you don't mind me interjecting here, is that several years ago we had we had two periods where we had about a $400 or $500 million cuts or reductions, and one of the things we found out during that process is that we would reduce one agency by a certain dollar amount, were allowed to backfill that money with not state general fund, maybe with some self-generated money, maybe with some fees that were left over. So the confusion lies in whether we're playing that we actually reduce the overall budget of an agency, or we reduce their state general fund dollars, but then allowed them to put more money through maybe some fees that they had left over, some self-generated revenue. I think that's the path that you possibly could be going down, which would lie the confusion between the two when the governor is discussing a reduction in state general fund and the senator's trying to look at it, not looking at total means of finance, not looking at just state general fund. And I think if you go back and look at those presentations that were made, I know the commissioner can speak to it because I remember it vividly. He would say we cut $400 million, and I would correct him and say, no, you only reduced $36 million because you were able to backfill everything else. We did this dance once before several years ago. So that might be the part where we're having some confusion. So as you move through trying to reconcile the numbers between the two, I think that's something you could probably look at to save both of you all some time. Now, Commissioner, I believe you were going to talk.
I think that may be part of it, but the other part of it is something that you all, I think, often are not mindful of, and that is the increase year to year in required expenditures related to services that you all mandate in law. And so you can cut in some areas and increase in others. And so if all you look at are the top numbers, you don't necessarily see what's below them. And I think Jay has...
Well, let me just add one thing that is being overlooked is that the budget that you inherited and we inherited had $860 million in one-time money that we replaced with recurring revenue. We said we're not going to have one-time money in the budget anymore. So in order to maintain the fiction that had existed in the previous administration that the budget was actually balanced, we said, no, it's not balanced because you've been using one-time money and we're not going to keep doing that. So the budget we imposed and the budget you approved has no one-time money so that you're not perpetuating this fiction that you're matching recurring expenses with recurring revenue. We're doing that now. We're only expending that comes back year after year after year, which is sound budgeting practice.
Thank you. Commissioner, the only numbers I'm looking at are from the last 2 years where you all have been in office. And I'm trying to follow the governor's statement that he's cut $600 million over the last 2 years, because I don't see it, not in state general fund, not in total means of financing. I do not believe the $600 million number is real. So if you all could provide some data to help us better understand that, I would appreciate that very much.
Sure.
I'd also like to ask about your statement about right size, the government is the right size. Because I don't know that I agree with that or I understand that. And one of the things that I have looked at, and I know that you all have looked at this also, is what does it cost us to deliver services in the state of Louisiana relative to other states? And we know from the work that GNO Inc. has done that our numbers are high, that we are an outlier. We stand out because our cost of delivering services is higher than the other states. And so I question whether we do have the right size government, and that the task is not just to find the revenue to fund it, but again, perhaps we need to be looking at, is this the right size government? Are these the services that we need to be delivering? Have you all done
let me address that. I think what I was referring to there is we had, especially 2 years ago, but then to some degree again last year as well, we had a lot of discussion about what we wanted to fund in light of that $2 billion deficit. How much revenue do we want to raise in order to fund those things that we think are critically important to the state of Louisiana? And we settled on the amount of government that we have currently. So that was the point that I had. We've already heard from all the people behind me and many, many others. You all deliberated and talked amongst yourself and among the Senate, and we came out at the level where we are. And I'm not sure what GNO Inc. study you're talking about. But the fact of the matter is we run a balanced budget in Louisiana. That budget is balanced, and we know that we have the 5th lowest state and local tax burden in the country. So the idea that we are spending more than other states to deliver services is not one that I will agree upon. I can't tell you that there isn't some service out there that costs more, but there will be others that cost less. And I think that one of the things that is missing quite often is just the structure of our government relative to others, other states, I should say, that is constitutionally mandated, where we supplement the local spending so much from the state side. And so I think if all you looked at were the state dollars, you might come to a conclusion that is not valid if you took into consideration state and local spending.
No doubt, and their study looks at all of that. It is difficult to do the work to compare all of the states and know what's funded with state or local or federal dollars, and so you do have to do some significant work to really know that you're comparing apples to apples. But I do think that work is worthwhile doing, and I don't know how you can look at our state without looking outside your own boundaries to know if we're doing a good job.
No, but I'm just saying when you do that, you got to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
I
Because
agree.
when you do, I know we have the 5th lowest state and local tax burden. We're running a balanced budget. And so I don't believe we are paying more for services in terms of our state general fund. I know that unlike some other states around us who didn't expand Medicaid, we may have more dollars that we're spending on health care. But they're not consuming more state general fund dollars to do that. And so, but I'm happy to take a look at whatever study you've got. I don't believe I've seen it.
I think that would be worthwhile, and I'd be happy to forward that to you.
Okay.
I guess just to close my comment, Chairman, I do think that there are more opportunities on the expense side, and I do think that you all have really not spent the time in honestly looking at our expenses. And so, I do think that the things that you're proposing are dramatic and drastic, and it's not anything that we want to do either. But I believe that there are other opportunities to reduce the budget, and would really appreciate the fact that, if you all would spend the time to really drill down and look at those.
Yeah, and if you have specific ideas, we're happy to sit down and talk to you about them. Take a look at them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Omni?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for coming in person and taking the time to speak with us. I have just a couple of questions for you. I hope they're all easy. The first one is theoretically speaking, should we pass this budget in its current form, as much as you don't like it, what would you do? Would you line item veto these cuts that are so ugly?
No, I wouldn't line item veto anything. If you line item veto a cut, it doesn't mean the cut doesn't happen. That funding doesn't happen, period.
So you would just have to leave it as it is?
No, I would have to decide whether to veto the entire budget. A line item wouldn't do any good.
Wouldn't fix it, okay.
But this is rather theoretical.
Yes, I
Okay.
just thought I'd start there.
I don't
for
believe
fun.
that's going to happen.
Okay. When you issue a call for the special session that we'll probably end up having, will the call be broad enough so that we can work on more than just increases in taxes or fees, so that we can possibly deal with a little reform and maybe some revenue reductions within the special session?
First, revenue reductions happen to the point that you don't raise revenue in this special session. But the call will be broad enough to encompass all of the areas upon which there is an agreement in principle between legislative leadership and myself to address the cliff. So wherever that is, there will be a call broad enough to do that. And then I think there's one more item that we would be inclined to include that doesn't really address a cliff, but in the event that Congress should pass a bill before it right now, which is, I think, pending in the Senate. I think the House passed it. I'm sorry, it's actually, but there is a bill that would allow tax relief for Louisiana citizens who suffered casualty losses in the floods of 2016. And absent some action by us, when they amend their federal returns for 16, they would also have to amend their state returns and actually pay more. So we would want to include an item in the call so that we could legislate similar to what was done after Katrina, so that doesn't happen. So that's the only thing unrelated to the cliff that I intend to put into the special session call, if we have one. And I hope we have one. Right now, I don't have a lot of reason to believe we will, but I hope we have one. But the other items will depend upon what the agreement looks like between myself and legislative leadership, and it will be broad enough so that those areas can be legislated.
And this bill that you're talking about that Congress is dealing with, I don't know the timeline that they expect to handle this bill. Do you feel that it's going to be moved so quickly that we would need to handle that in a special session?
Well, it's a tax-related bill. We can't do it in the regular session. And so you wouldn't be able to do it until next year. And so I do think it would happen before then. That's why we would include it.
Okay, I just know Congress sometimes moves very slowly.
So, or not at all.
Yeah. Now, would you be in support of having the standard of reasonable compatibility changed slightly so that it reflects the standard that more states use? In Louisiana, I'm told that our reasonable compatibility for Medicaid eligibility is 25%. And if we would more closely align with other states, then that might mean that some who maybe really shouldn't qualify for Medicaid would not. Have you looked into this at all?
Yeah, I had a conversation the other day with Secretary Gee. I know it's something that she's looking at, and so that's why I have some idea of what you're talking about. And a reduction below 25% is something that we're looking at. Whether we go to 15 or 10%, I don't know, and I'm not prepared to give you an answer on that today.
Okay. It's something I'm just now looking into. And my last question is this. As you know, in my House district, we are not quite there yet with the rest of the state as far as recovering the economy with job availability and all that. And as late as last week, I'm still hearing from industry leaders within the oil industry that one of the hindrances to having a return of a lot of oil business in my area is still the legacy lawsuits. Can you give me an update on where we are with that?
Well, the law remains unchanged unless and until somebody changes it. We haven't made any changes one way or the other as it relates to legacy lawsuits since I've been governor. I know there have been 3 changes since 2006, all of which were sought by the oil and gas industry. But there have been 3 bills passed since then to afford relief to the oil and gas sector as it relates to legacy lawsuits. Beyond that, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Stokes.
Thank you, Chairman. I did want to say real quick, because this wasn't in what I was going to ask, but Senator Hewitt had mentioned that it seems that we spend more than other states that we're compared to. And I would love to see one of the things that we would study. I think, and it's my hunch, that if you pull out the pension debt payments, not the current pension costs for the current employees, but if you pull the debt payments out of our universities and out of all of our different agencies, and you also pull out, you could have to compare us to other states that have about the same number of people in Medicaid, probably, or adjust for that. But I think our Medicaid matching rate's very low, and our pension debt is very high. From what I understand, Texas counts its pension debt as a debt payment. They don't bury it in the cost of every teacher, every administrator. So it's something that I'm aware of.
Well, and we'll take a look at it. And by the way, it's good to see you here today.
Thank you.
I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The other question that I originally was going to ask is that the task force, the HCR 11 task force, myself, the Tax Foundation, were constantly saying that we needed to decouple our taxation system from the federal government. And we refused to do that as a legislature. I think I authored it 4 times. So, I don't know, there were probably plenty other ones authored too. And now it appears that since we did not do that, and federal taxes are going to go down, that every Louisianian's taxes are going to go up. Is that in fact true?
Well, I can't say every.
Every, right.
Revenue will increase. But at the end of the day, revenue will not increase by more than is falling off the books. Mm-hmm. So most people will pay less going forward. Some people will probably pay more. It depends on where their individual income tax situation is.
Are you thinking of just income tax, or are you thinking of sales tax too?
Sales tax too.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
If you look at the revenue that falls off the books compared to what
Yes.
we're asking for to fix the cliff,
Mm-hmm.
most people will pay less.
Right. I agree with that.
It's
Yeah.
It's 1.38 billion in revenue falling off the books. We're asking for 994 million to fix the cliff.
So, and my point is really that if we would have passed one of those tax reform measures, it would be unfortunate for the state of Louisiana because we would not see the additional revenue from the federal taxes going down, but and we wouldn't also see every individual Louisianian's tax bills on an income tax basis only increasing. It's just ironic that when we look back now, if we would have done the suggestions of the HCR 11 task force or the Tax Foundation or the group that Dr. Richardson chaired previous to the HCR 11 Commission or any of the other groups that have suggested it, Louisianians' taxes would not be going up right now. However, that would be bad for the state of Louisiana, but I think it's a little ironic.
Yes, ma'am. I think you're right. But as you know, those recommendations were made by the task force as part of a really big set of recommendations, all of which were supposed to be implemented together to reform our tax structure and just make it fairer, more stable, more predictable. And there were some components in there that were revenue neutral or actually a decrease in revenue in exchange for some of the others. But none of it was done, and as a result, because of what happened in Congress in December, there will be some additional revenue to the state of Louisiana.
Right, and that would not have been recognized if we would have fixed the rate at a
Correct.
flat 3.6 or something like that. So anyway, thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you.
Representative Jackson.
Blame it on Marcus. I just had one follow-up question. Heard a lot of talk and about the revenue that's going to be realized from the federal legislation that passed. Do we know if that's going to be realized in this fiscal year or not?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Secretary of Revenue Kimberly Robinson to address that specifically.
Why don't we do-
It's my understanding that, first of all, it's going to be part of the fix. It's a question of when it comes.
Right.
And I believe that the tax payments, as you know, will be due in January, but there are withholdings between now and then.
Right.
And so on the withholding side, if those are adjusted, obviously the sooner they are adjusted, the sooner that additional revenue from that component comes in.
Okay. Mr. Chairman doesn't want to waste your time, and so we'll hear from Ms. Robinson, I suppose Secretary Robinson, when it's time. But that was just my concern, that we may be counting on something that we won't have timely.
There's at least 6 more people that have questions for you, so nothing against Ms. Robinson. I'd rather run through those and then bring the Secretary back up, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Katrina, you finished?
I'm finished. That's just my concern, and I'm sure we're going to get into that fully, but for too long, we've counted on money that we anticipated, and then we see ourselves in mid-year budget cuts. I want to make sure whatever we include to adjust what's needed, that is actual revenue, and that we're not brought back in as a joint committee on the budget to make mid-year cuts.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pell?
Thank you. I wasn't going to bring this up, but maybe this will clarify some of the concerns that Sharon Hewitt had. Looking at the House Fiscal Office's data, in '07, the last budget before the Katrina bubble, the state general fund spending was about $7.7 billion. It rocketed up to about $9.05 billion in '08, which is the baseline year y'all are using, 10 years ago, which is a fair baseline, but it is the highest level in the history of Louisiana for state general fund spending. By 18, it was back down to 8.72, according to their data, which is a decline, true. But in 14, by the 14 budget, it was down to 7.7. So in truth, I think what Senator Hewitt's talking about is we are seeing an increase from 14 to 18 of about $1 billion. So state general fund has gone up in the last 3 years, 3 budgets, by $1 billion. And I think that's where her concern's coming from. And that's in real dollars. It's not.
But it doesn't represent necessarily an increase in spending on the state level. And one of the reasons is, as Commissioner Darden told you, there were over $860 million in one-time money just in the budget we inherited. And it's not just that when this term started, we had a $2 billion deficit in contrast to the $1 billion surplus my predecessor inherited. Trust funds were also spent down over that same time period by a total of about $3 billion. So those dollars were being swept into the budget. And so I think, you can look at these numbers any way that you want to look at them. But the fact of the matter is, there is $1 billion less general fund than we had 10 years ago in the current budget. And without a fix to the cliff, there will be $2 billion less in next fiscal year.
I understand.
And it gets very, very difficult to maintain the level of government services that I think we all support.
But there is an increase of $1 billion since 14 in spending, is all I'm saying. So, but look, that's not really what I want. I was just sharing with you what I think is her concern. Here's my concern. The Federal Reserve issued a report a few months back that showed gross state product about 1.6% growth year over year, where almost every other southern state was double that or close to double it. clearly income from corporations and individuals derives from gross state product growth. The proposals that you guys have made about revenue changes are based on mostly on income tax increases. Do you have any concern that those will have a direct impact upon gross state product, which is already severely depressed? Or if we put those into effect, are you not concerned that gross state product would decline further?
Yeah, first of all, I don't know that it's fair to say that most of the revenue that we have asked for come on the individual income tax side.
I didn't say individual, I said income taxes.
Okay,
Corporate and
okay,
individual.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, but that's all right. I just want to
I
clarify.
thought you said individual. But if you look at the current proposal that I have on the table, I don't know that that's accurate either. And I can only tell you, and I haven't looked at the Federal Reserve report that you just mentioned. I'll be happy to take a look at it. By every measure, the state of Louisiana is doing much better than we were just a year ago or 2 years ago. It's evidencing itself in terms of lower unemployment, higher wages. We actually have more people working in construction now than ever before, more people in healthcare than ever before. It is stabilizing not just the state's revenue, but many families. And I know that what Representative Amity said is correct. The good news is not equally shared by every geographic region of the state or by every economic sector. But I believe that there is no doubt that the state is heading in the right direction, and there is nothing that we are proposing that I believe jeopardizes that continued growth. Again, I would point out that we had the second best economic development win in the United States of America last year with DXC Technologies coming to New Orleans to. In fact, I don't think it's your district, but it's pretty close down there. And I think the road that we own will lead to more wins of that type and to more growth, more investment, more job creation going forward.
So you have no concern that shifting revenue generation to more income tax based, corporate or personal, would have a negative impact upon the growth of state product in Louisiana, which in turn is the generator for most of our state revenue, or a lot of it.
What I have confidence in is the task force report that was studied by people who know a whole lot more about this than I do. And right now, it's my understanding, and I might be wrong on this, I don't think so, less than 3% of the revenue that comes to the state of Louisiana comes from corporations. That's the income tax and the franchise tax. And in fact, it's much more than that from gaming today. So I don't believe that anything that we're proposing is out of balance. I don't think anything that we're proposing is harmful. Quite the contrary. I believe the stability and predictability and fairness associated with our proposals will be good for this state and certainly good for the business community.
We had bad news last week. We lost the opportunity to compete for Amazon. We also lost a substantial car manufacturing plant, though we offered, I understand, around $500 million. You don't have a concern that we have a negative business climate that would attract major manufacturing to our state other than petrochemical manufacturing, which kind of has to come here because of our resources?
What I'm concerned is we don't have a significant commitment evidenced over time to our workforce development that allows companies to make a business decision, as we would want them to do, to invest in Louisiana. Now, I think we're getting better. I think that's evidenced in the DXC Technologies deal and some other things. We have more foreign direct investment in our state on a per capita basis than any other state in the nation. And so I believe we are doing better. We're not where we want to be. But the question is, how do we achieve the balance that we want going forward? I am very confident in the task force recommendations that they achieve that balance. And one of the things that I think hinders us with respect to the business community is that we don't provide the stability here. It's not the overall cost. They know we have a low tax burden. But they don't know where it's going to be from year to year because we don't have a stable, predictable structure that we have enacted and that we will allow it to move forward and grow with the economy over time. And so they can't really account for that. And that doesn't help us when they are making a decision about where they're going to invest their dollars.
Texas, Florida, Tennessee have no income tax, corporate income tax. They're growing leaps and bounds. You don't have a concern that our income tax structure on corporations is a negative to corporate growth or traction?
I have confidence in the task force recommendations. I have confidence in the plan. I mean, I can answer the question 10 more times, and you can ask it 10 more times.
Okay. That's fair enough. You're a good attorney, just like
Thank you.
Your friend, Mr. Block, back there. Thank you, sir.
Representative, hi, 11, excuse me, Representative, excuse me, Senator Chabert, Senator Chabert.
Musical chairs, I'm sure this isn't the time to ask for a bigger committee room in the future. Governor, thank you for appearing before us. We always appreciate it, and certainly appreciative of your time, willing to get to folks who may be a little further down on the queue. But when that occurs, you often are echoing previous statements of members, and I want to echo what Representative Amade said. I would encourage you whenever we do have to meet that call of what do we do with the temporary revenue-raising measures. I want to first say I agree with you, and I have this discussion with constituents and citizens around the state all the time about the low overall state and local tax burden that our citizens feel. I get that, but at the same time, as many of my colleagues in the Senate know, while we were in that first special session, I had a massive grid in the Senate conference room on the whiteboard that went over just about every tax that we have that affects small business and the individual taxpayer in comparison to a number of our sister states, a number of the states that are in the South, a number of the states around the country that we want to liken ourselves to be. I say all that there are some taxes that are burdensome to small businesses, and I would encourage your team to not only look at the massive ways that we can increase revenue to the state, but some of the smaller ways that we can have a true impact on rate reduction on some of the taxes that businesses are paying across the state. I know business owner pay those taxes. And, often, and I don't want to get into philosophical economics debate here, but a lot of times the disagreements that the two parties have are whether or not, you derive the revenue necessary to provide the services via a direct or an indirect revenue generation to the state. The way our tax structure is currently, we get the majority of it from sales and income. So if we can reduce that tax burden on citizens and small business folks, I think that revenue won't be a true loss to the state because you're going to realize it in income tax growth. You're going to realize it in sales tax growth. Some folks call that trickle down. You're going to see a lot of that going on with the federal tax plan that's going to be in place. I think we have the opportunity to kind of bring a little bit of balance there with some smaller debt relief. So I just wanted to echo that, and I'd like to get your commitment that you'd be willing to look at some of those things, and most importantly, encourage your team to look at some of those rates.
Well, I'm certainly willing to look at them. One of the things we proposed was a lowering of corporate and individual income tax rates. But in order to appreciably to do that in a way that's meaningful, you first have to do away with the federal income tax deduction, which only 3 states have. That's what she was referring to earlier. That was something you all were unwilling to consider. So we didn't do that. But I'm happy to look at any of this going forward, and it I would remind you again. The cliff, as we've discussed it today, is $994 million. That's what I'm asking that we fix. The amount of revenue that is falling off the books is $1.38 billion. So do the math. If I'm not asking that we replace dollar for dollar everything that's fallen off the books, so the burden will be lower.
Thank you.
Senator Morrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick points. I'm going to assume you're a friendly witness, so I might lead a little bit. Hopefully we won't get into a fight. Just a bit of clarification, because we seem to be a little all over the place up here.
Just leave me where I want to go.
Okay. Today we're discussing the budget, not proposals, correct? That's kind of why we're here today.
Yeah, I mean, look, as of right now, we have a cliff. It's $1 billion less state general fund next year than this year, and we had to give you cuts that deal with that in general fund, and I think the cuts are $2.5 billion total when you throw in the federal dollars. So that's what we're here to discuss.
Right. And just so we get clarification, I feel like I'm kind of having like a rehash of civics lesson, but you propose a budget which becomes a legislative document that goes through the legislative process, correct?
That's correct.
So if the legislature thinks that we can cut our way out of this, we'll have plenty of opportunities to provide alternative cuts, correct?
Correct.
So, and I guess I heard a lot of glad handing and backslapping, saying, "Well, last year we did X, Y, and Z, and TOPS got fully funded, and higher ed got fully funded." There wasn't $1 billion cliff last year, was there?
No.
Okay. Another couple quick questions. So, a lot of people have made this allusion of the fact that we obviously are going to a special session. And I think that we can all agree that at some point we're going to go into a special session, but I think everyone keeps forgetting this real kind of basic fact. The legislature could call itself into special, right?
Yes, sir.
So while people keep saying, Mr. Governor, what's your call going to say? Mr. Governor, what are you going to do? This situation could just as easily be solved if the legislature could agree what they wanted to do. They wouldn't need you to call us into special, would we?
That is correct as well.
Okay. Also, I've heard today a lot of these cherry picks of, in this state they have no income tax, in this state they do things differently. As you know, because we had a lot of discussions over the years about tax reform, you can't cherry pick what you like from states. Texas has low income, but ridiculously high property tax. If you want to take a state's tax structure, you got to take the whole thing. You can't take the parts you like. And I think the problem you had, and you said this, we're one of 3 states that deals with federal itemized deduction, right?
Well, the deduction for federal income tax liability, yeah.
Correct. So if we want to be like these other states, the first thing the legislature should have done was not make us one of the 3 outlier states on itemized deduction, right?
Well, one would think, but more broadly speaking, the legislature, I think, should choose to enact at least some of the recommendations that came from the task force that you created to study and make recommendations about what our tax structure ought to look like based on where we are in Louisiana and in comparison and in contrast to other states. It looked at all of that, and it came back and said, this is what you should do. And not a single one of those recommendations has the legislature acted on.
Right. So and I think what's really important, and we're kind of not focusing on this, the legislature tasked itself with coming into last year's fiscal section to do something regarding tax reform, to offer some proposals to do something. And the reason why we're here today is because the legislature utterly and completely failed to do that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Hey, what's going on? Representative Bacala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Governor and Jay, thank y'all for being here. And
Jay's hoping he gets to present the budget proposal to y'all at some point.
Jay's taking a break right now. Governor, actually, I have very few questions, but I did want to note in your budget on page 100 that the cut, and of course we think this is the worst case scenario to the many people in here representing now waivers, is 2.8%. So guys, I'm pleased to report you haven't seen the budget, but you're not being devastated. Hopefully we can make some of that up.
Hopefully we'll make all of it up. And there are
Yes,
people,
sir.
there are people on waiting lists for waivers, and those need to be funded too.
Right. But people just don't know what the budget contains because while we're getting a chance to do a
That's
quick
because y'all
scan, a
keep
lot of
asking me
people-
questions instead of letting Jay go through it.
Well, we'll give it to Jay in a little while. I did have a couple of questions, Governor, and Some of them involve dish payments, which are detailed on page 99. But I'm also, we're showing to that general category an $831 million cut to the dish. It's actually encompasses a little bit more than that. But I'm also looking at a report that was, and I'll have to get to answer this probably offline, but on a January 9th report in reference to, or in response to HCR 86, it's saying that same category of payment, disproportionate share, there's a mandated phase out of that program under the Affordable Care Act, which might have been extended, but there's not specific. So is that a reduction in spending that maybe is being reduced because the program is no longer allowed under federal government?
No, and I'm going to allow, I mean, obviously Jay, and I suspect at that point in time either Dr. Gee or Jeff Reynolds is going to come up and answer specific questions.
Right.
One of the ways Congress chose to pay for the cost of the Affordable Care Act was to phase out DISH and use that phase out to fund the Affordable Care Act. Up to now, the phase out of DISH has been delayed year after year after year. Okay. Because I think what would happen is if states no longer got DISH, they would be forced to expand. And the folks who are making these decisions are not wanting to drive more states to expand if that's not what they want to do. But DISH gets very, very complicated, and so as for what numbers are on page 100 or in that report, I'm going to ask respectfully if you'll reserve that question specifically until we're on that part of the budget.
Well, just quoting from the report on January 9th, it said disproportionate share hospitals, DSH, reductions are mandated by the Affordable Care Act beginning in FY 2018. There might be delayed, but delays deepen out-year reductions. That's just a direct quote.
Yeah, and I believe that is contained in the budget document in front of you. Yes. But as to whether that phase out will actually start, we don't know. It's like anything else. You have to base certain assumptions, base your budget on certain assumptions. And one of them, I'll tell you, because this is related, Representative Bacala, is we assume that Congress is going to reauthorize CHIP. They all say they want to do it. The House, the Senate, Republicans, and Democrats, they haven't done it yet. But we assume that they are going to do it. If not, then that's an additional cost we're going to have to bear next year.
Yes, sir. And one other specific question on, if you look at page 134 of your budget, while we're showing cuts to LSU of $350 million, to Southern University of $41 million, et cetera, and to TOPS 200-something million, we're showing an increase of funding of $452 million to the Board of Regents. So I'm assuming that the cut to the LSU system of $350, we're just allowing the Board of Regents a little more flexibility in how the money is moved around, since their budget actually, you're showing it going from $448 million to $900 million, again, an increase of $452. So I'm assuming that the cuts to LSU and Southern and the other institutions were really just transferring the authority to the Board of Regents to better distribute the money?
That's right. That's right. It's a roll-up of those cuts to the Board of Regents budget so that they can then allocate it to the various systems.
Which obviously could also allocate back to TOPS if that was a choice, I'm assuming, or not? Is that...
No.
That's not in the choices. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. I'll just stop right there. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harris, are you finished?
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Representative Harris.
I think they got it that time. I'll be brief, and I know and I appreciate you being here, Governor, to take the questions and to present the budget. I do appreciate it. I do want to make mention of the fact I am very appreciative about the budget and how we're putting it together these days without any one-time money. You and I
Yeah.
worked on that for several years previous to your administration. And Act 419 and those things that we got passed have really made things better, in my opinion, so that we can now discuss not the it, but the why. The it being the budget, but why do you need more government money, or you want to grow government by a certain extent, if that's the case, or why I may want to cut it. So these are very good. I think it puts us in a posture to have good debates, as long as we have respectable debates on both sides and do it with some genuine thought to correcting a problem. My question is, you had presented basically the HCR 11 recommendations as a one solution to the fiscal cliff. I have a particular question about compression of the brackets. And there's been a lot of press play about we don't have enough information or anything like we can't act on it because we don't have the information. So I'm asking you, on the compression, who are you compressing the taxes on? What rates? Whose rates are going to go up on the individual tax rates?
Well, it would depend on whether we chose to go back to Stelly or stop somewhere in the middle. But the deal around bracket compression was overcome in the middle of December with the act of Congress. And that's something that I have communicated to you all more than once, is that to the degree that that act raises revenue on the individual income tax side, it obviates the need to do that again through bracket compression. And I think that's a particularly positive development, because that would have been the hardest thing, I think, to get agreement on. And so while that was in the plan or I should say the recommendations that came from the task force, and it was from my plan to address the cliff both 2 years ago and last year, and what I submitted before December the 14th, I think it was, it doesn't need to be a component part of the plan going forward.
So that's the first I've heard that, but I appreciate that we're, in other words, the document that you released 2 weeks ago had the compression in it, so that's not something to be considered now.
Well, it's not something that we need to do, and that's a conversation that I had with the speaker last week, I think it was. I get my dates mixed up because it's just no longer necessary.
Good, because I know the last time that was proposed before the legislature had some rates going up astronomically, in my opinion, on the individual taxpayer. My next question, very brief. If you are able, or you see that there is a benefit to calling a special session, hopefully in February, I'm in agreement with you on that. Will you put in the call for us to be able to examine some of the tax credits? For instance, movie tax credits and those sort of things. I don't know if the public is aware, but just this year we have certified almost $117 million in movie tax credits. We're paying Walmart, we're paying for $398,000 for one of their advertisements. We're doing Popeyes for almost $400,000. I find it kind of really egregious to me that we're talking about cutting tops, we're talking about cutting waivers when we're giving Fortune 500 companies money to do advertisements, and when every economic study that we've seen says we lose 82 cents on the dollar that we spend with that. So would you be willing to put those kind of things in the call?
I'm willing to put whatever in the call forms the basis of our agreement in principle to fix the cliff.
Excellent.
I don't know that will be part of that agreement, and I would remind you that a couple of years ago there was, I want to get this right, $234 million in credits that were certified.
Right, and that's the
yeah.
year that we did have to cut tops. If you remember,
Well,
that tops was not funded.
We
So
didn't have to cut tops.
Well,
y'all
but-
chose not to do the permanent reform. And
So that we could pay for movie tax credits like this. That's where I find it kind of egregious.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is there's already been reform as recently as last session. You didn't undertake comprehensive tax reform, but you did change the motion picture investor tax credit. You did so in a way that maintained a cap that was $53 million less than the maximum amount of credits that had ever been certified, and you tried to produce a better return on investment for the state of Louisiana with the credits that you were going to certify and pay. That happened just last year.
It absolutely did.
And so I cannot imagine that it's going to be a fruitful avenue to go down this year in terms of fixing the cliff. But if that's what the speaker wants to take up, then we'll discuss that at our next meeting when we try to figure out if there's going to be enough agreement in principle to have that special session that you and I and the speaker and the president all think we need to have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Abraham.
Thank you. Governor, thank you for
Mark, thank
being
you.
here. I don't know whether I should direct it to you or save it for Jay, but everybody seems to be asking you, so I guess I'll jump on board here. Now, just a quick question. We've had a lot of discussion about positions authorized but not filled over the last year or two. I'm looking at the position analysis on page 29, and it shows that we have an increase in authorized positions for this year by like 500 something positions. I was trying to understand what was the reasoning on that if we increase positions.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to direct that question to Jay. I can tell you that we are down about 33,000 positions over 10 years. I know y'all don't like the 10-year time horizon, but it's true. We're down 33,000 employees over the 10 years. And
33,000 employees or 33,000 positions?
It's the state workforce number. Well, the column I'm seeing says number of employees.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I just...
The increase that you're referring to in corrections is a result of the state taking back over the operation of that facility in Allen Parish. That represents 170 positions.
They were subcontractors, I guess, before. They were subs.
It was GEO.
They were employees of
It was a private prison.
It was a private entity. So with the state taking it back over, the folks working there become state employees again. The other large increase is in LDH, 267 positions, and I know that part of that is the result of an agreement on the Elms facility where the state, I believe in order to avoid litigation, entered into an agreement that we were going to staff up better to avoid the federal government shutting down the facility because we were understaffed. There must be another component. Is that it? Or is that that's it? Okay, well, that's it. That's the...
So that Elms was 200 and something employees, that was the majority of that?
267 employees. Yeah. It represents the settlement in the Cooper lawsuit that had to do with the criminally insane, to remove them from jail facilities and put them in a facility that could deal with their mental illness. And that required the state to have to increase its employment base in order to satisfy that need. That's
again, these are authorized, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to all be filled when we have this sheet right here, right? That's how I'm understanding it.
No, but we should be very honest with you. Most of those are going to be filled because you can't run that new prison without putting people in it, and you can't meet the terms of the settlement with in federal court unless you actually have people. Now, I'll let the LDH testify later as to whether they have to fill all of them and exactly, what that represents. But I'm confident that the explanation Jay gave you is right, and it accords with the explanation I was given as well.
Okay. And when I said authorized but not filled, I wasn't referring just to health and hospitals. I'm saying the overall 33,000, we always have positions that are authorized and unfilled. I mean, we've been through this before. So this doesn't necessarily mean that 33,301 positions will be filled. It's just what you have authorized, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Representative McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up on something that you just stated by Representative Abraham. And Jay, you said this is JLCB, and several months ago at JLCB, there was a discussion about the Allen Correction Center, and we never followed up with GEO leaving as the private correctional management company. Now with them leaving, we're going to add 150 state jobs. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir, that's right. We've taken over the operation of that facility. It's not closed, it just moved from private management back to the state to manage, and so the state has to employ people now to operate the facility.
Okay, but now we're going to operate it at a cost of $52 per day per inmate rather than $24.95 or $24.39 per day per inmate?
I don't know exactly how much per day it's going to be for that particular facility, if it's going to be different than any other facility. But when the private contractor decided to walk based upon a reduction in the amount of per diem they were going to receive, we have no choice other than taking back over the operation of the facility.
Okay, but now it's going to be at an increased expense.
I don't know. You have to ask the corrections folk that. I can't tell you if it's going to be increased from the state taking over vis-a-vis what they were paying, what GEO was being paid, but I do know that they left and they weren't going to do it any longer for what we were paying them, so it may very well represent a greater cost to us than it was when we were paying them at X per diem per day.
Okay, well, I guess what concerns me about it is, I mean, I've already started looking in this executive budget, and, you know, I see the Wynn Correctional Center being reduced, yet we're increasing this facility. I guess I don't understand. Why would we want to increase the number of state employees at one facility and decrease one that's costing us less per day?
We didn't want to. We were forced to by virtue of the private provider leaving in Allen, and we don't want to have to do what you're referencing at Wynn, but we have no choice based upon the cliff that we're facing and the budget that we have to present to you today.
Well, I'm sorry, I still don't get it. I still don't understand that. In budgeting I do, $52 per day per inmate is more expensive than $24.39 per day per inmate in a private prison.
It absolutely is.
And the numbers that we operate on the state level is $52 per day. So, anyway, we can dissect this much later.
I'm being told that, just to complete that thought, the average cost is $36. Angola is the one that is the $52 level because obviously it's the most secure facility.
Okay, thank you.
But suffice it to say, to conclude this conversation, we don't want the cut at Wynn. We don't want the cut to the sheriffs. And so we think that we would be visiting tremendous problems upon our correction system with those cuts. So we welcome your help.
Is that it, Representative McFarland?
That's it, thank you.
Okay. Governor, the budget that you presented today is roughly, total means of finance is about $30.6 billion. That sound about right?
I'm not looking at that particular line right now, but I'm not going to quibble with it.
So the actual money spent in 2017 was $29.4 billion. So though we're losing $1 billion, this budget is actually higher than the money that we actually spent in 2017.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that?
No, and I'm not sure you're accounting for all the interagency transfers.
I'm accounting for state general fund, interagency transfers, self-generated, statutorily dedicated funds, and federal funds.
30.6 total.
But we can share sheets later.
Yeah.
The $994 million that the shortfall, does that, are you taking off the 233.4 REC numbers? Can we reduce that 944, or have you already taken into account the 233.4?
I am including what REC has done to the forecast. And it is the improved forecast that has moved the cliff to a smaller number.
Gotcha. So it's not that
It's the change in the REC has a certain amount of money forecasted for current year.
Right.
They have a certain amount of money forecasted for next year. The difference is 994 million.
So you're taking the 233.4 and adding that to and subtracting that from the original cliff, and that's how we got the 944. So in essence, if someone's listening at home, they would think you could take the 994 minus the new REC number of 233.4
No,
and
it's in
reduce
there.
the number. So that's already included in there.
Right, and that's why, for consistency and simplicity's sake, I just used REC's forecast for current year and next year. The difference is 994. So to the extent that the improved forecast
stays the same,
yeah, then that's accounted for.
And the plan that you have presented, or that raises the $994 in discussion.
I wish it was $994.
Excuse me, 994 million.
Yes. Yes,
So-
in fact, at one time it would have raised more, because I came up with a plan when the delta was $1.074 billion.
So one of the questions we've asked back and forth is, do we have any fiscal notes that actually we can display that will show that it raises the $994 million that is in the plan? Are we any closer? I know it's a fiscal note, and we've all done this dance, but are we any closer to getting? You're confident that it raises some range in that number. Are we any closer to being able to produce something that members can look at and say, if I vote for this bill here, it's going to generate X, and that total number equals 994 million?
I believe the fiscal notes to some bills have been done, and maybe for all of the draft bills. I don't know the latest status. I don't know what might have been done in the last several days. But it is my understanding that the Legislative Fiscal Office has attached numbers to those areas, those items that we call for in our plan. But we know close enough, Representative Henry, what those numbers would be, that we can come up with a plan in principle.
When you say a plan in principle,
well, an agreement in principle, that we are going to undertake certain things to close the cliff. And we will be able to make an agreement on that and move forward. And as you know, sometimes during the course of the legislative session, fiscal notes change. Sometimes they'll go up, sometimes they'll go down. Sometimes that happens because of amendments to the bill themselves. Sometimes it happens because assumptions are changed, or different circumstances in the economy have changed, and that sort of thing. But we know enough. In fact, we've known enough for a long time. I would submit ever since the task force made its recommendations. And all of those bills were submitted last year, and fiscal notes were generated last year. Not that they'll be the same, but they're going to be close enough. But as it relates to all of the individual elements in the plan that I put forward, all of which came from the task force recommendations, there has been sufficient knowledge for a long time to allow us to move towards an agreement in principle to solve the cliff.
but as it relates to a specific fiscal note, when do you think we will get those? That's what everything we're basing on is you do it as in, we have the idea, we think it's going to be correct. I know you sent some bills, but after our previous meeting at the mansion, you had sent some bills to Representative Abramson, maybe a couple of the members, that they've had a chance to look at them, and I don't think those bills were actually 100% accurate in what was sent, so I think they're working through all of that. What I'm trying to figure out is, as we sit here today, and from our previous meeting at the governor's mansion, you discussed how you had roughly somewhere between 39 and 41 Democrats on board with what your plan was to generate $994 million. And that you were counting on House members to come up with some other plan or agree to that plan. One or the other didn't make a difference to you. And all I'm trying to figure out is that without an accurate number of what it's really going to generate, I'm curious how you were able to convince the other 39 members that it was okay when they didn't know what it was going to cost, one way or the other. And when you could just give us that simple one page, and sometimes that one page, other times they might be multiple pages, that simple document that says, gentlemen, ladies, these are the 10 bills that I would like you all to vote for, and this is how much they're going to generate, one way or the other. I'm assuming the senators have already received that information, because at no point in time do we ever discuss what the Senate Democrats want to do, Senate Republicans. Maybe they're already on board, and it's just 5 or 6 people back in the House that are opposed. I don't know, and I've never asked them. What I really am trying to get from you today is just a commitment that we'll get the fiscal notes on these bills that you all have had and been working on for so long, which seemed at this point should be elementary to get, when we can actually get them from you.
The fiscal office works for you. Doesn't work for me. And
so you dropped these bills off you dropped these bills off months ago.
We've given you a one-page document that explains, and again, borrowed from the task force, what we would do to fix the cliff. We tell you, based on our analysis, how much revenue would be raised so that we can maintain a certain amount of the revenue from those items that are falling off the cliff, that are going to sunset on June 30th.
So could we just get a copy of your analysis?
First of all, my plan, I believe, has been out there for a long time, and yet you can.
Yeah, it's 3 pages. I'm talking about the physical analysis, the numbers, the numbers that drive it. Can we get your
analysis? I had
analysis?
a conversation today with Representative Abramson, and he told me that he's been exchanging information with Kimberly, and if I'm not mistaken, with Mr. Albrecht for a couple of weeks now. I think I don't want to put words in, but certainly he's been exchanging information. But the point of the matter is, we know enough about the cliff. We know enough about the revenue that's going away on June 30th, and the options we have to replace it, and we know enough about the revenue associated with each of those options that has not been an impediment to reaching an agreement in principle to fix the cliff.
But I'm telling you, as I sit here today, it's from the folks that I've talked to, it's an impediment because I haven't seen anything in writing of what it actually is, just with the fiscal note.
Yeah.
I understand that I guess, as I'm assuming that fiscal office have had these bills for months now, that maybe I should address it to them that they haven't been able to produce a fiscal note in an adequate time.
But they had every single one of these bills last year.
So the bills are not changing at all from last year.
I didn't say that.
So then the fiscal note will change.
They've had these bills for the last year, and we all know close enough as to what these things are going to produce in terms of revenue that we could get together and decide to fix the cliff. When
you say get together,
sort of like we did the other day at the governor's mansion when you were there. How
did that work out?
Well, I have yet to receive any plan or component part of a plan from anybody in the legislature as to how we would bridge our differences. And that's why I'm saying I can't negotiate against myself.
No, I know you can't negotiate against yourself, but it's just the idea of everybody getting in a room and deciding what we're going to do. It's supposed to be done in a room like this.
Yeah.
With people behind you in yellow shirts and all the different shirts that are going to come. That's where it's supposed to take place. It's not supposed to take place at the governor's mansion.
Ultimately, it will either happen in a room like this or it won't. But just like you see President Trump meeting with McConnell and with Schumer.
Careful, you're walking into a good one right here, but if you want to compare yourself to Trump, that's good.
First of all, I don't think I compared myself with anyone. It's the process that you have to work, and that's what leadership is about. We've got a speaker, we've got a president, we've got committee chairman, we've got myself, and I think coming up with an agreement in principle as to how we move forward is the best way to do that. If we don't exercise leadership and nobody tries to figure out, okay, what is the best thing for this state and how do I get people to move in that direction, then we sort of flounder around. We don't get anything done, and it'll look a lot like the last 2 years.
I think if you give us that information, those specific fiscal notes, I think we'll get a lot further along the way.
Well, I will tell you that you've got all the information you need, Representative Henry, to move significantly forward. So that we can get, yeah.
Governor, thank you for coming. We appreciate your time. I know it's 12 o'clock, members. I think, Commissioner, you're going to be up next to go over your presentation?
Whenever you tell me to, yes, sir.
I'm assuming, Governor, you're not going to stay for the presentation, are you?
Didn't let me close.
Oh, I'm sorry. No. Well, are you going to take questions on closing? Because I'll let everybody know right now, because it'll start all over again. So I would recommend you say no.
My closing will not generate any new questions.
It already has.
Let's get this problem fixed, guys, ladies. We've known about it for a couple of years. There are only so many options out there. You're not going to pass a budget that makes these kind of cuts. The people deserve better than what they've been getting. Let's fix this problem. Let's stabilize this state. Let's set the path set ourselves on a path to prosperity for our families, and we can do that. And tremendous opportunity is out there for the state of Louisiana. But we got to get this done. We need to do it in February, and I'm urging you to sit down with me. Let's figure this out. Let's get it done in February. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm thinking that with the number of questions that were asked, you're trying to make sure I don't come back next year. But I'm hopeful that next year's budget presentation will be very vanilla compared to this one. So thank you very much.